Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Investigating and Prosecuting Trafficking in Illicit Massage Businesses, Part 1. My name is Emily Thrush, and I am the Project Coordinator at AEquitas, the Prosecutors Resource on Violence Against Women, and I will be moderating today's webinar. This presentation will be the first of a three-part series providing an overview of illicit massage businesses, or IMBs, which are known fronts for criminal activity and human trafficking. The presenters will discuss how women are recruited, harbored, and exploited within those networks. This webinar will explore some of the challenges facing law enforcement and prosecutors, demonstrating the need for strategies to build evidence-based cases that can ensure that offenders are held accountable for their wide-ranging criminal activity. Before we begin the substantive portion of our program, I will provide a few logistical notes. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact iLink directly at 800-799-4510. And if you're using the internet audio option, we do recommend you dialing in with a phone since the connections are often more reliable. Throughout the presentation, if you're unclear about anything or you need clarification or you have questions for the presenters, you can use the iLink hand raise indicator, which is located on the toolbar in the top left-hand portion of your screen near the presenter's photo and to the right of the conference call number. And you can also chat me, and that's a private chat with your questions, on the left-hand side of your screen below the attendee list. I will share your questions with the presenters so they can be addressed either during the webinar or followed up after the webinar is over. Today's webinar is hosted by AEquitas, the Prosecutors Resource on Violence Against Women, and Polaris through funding from the U.S. Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. Written materials, including a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and the presenters' biographies, will be emailed to you after the presentation. In addition, today's webinar is being recorded for later viewing. AEquitas' mission is to improve the quality of justice in sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, human trafficking cases, and we do this by developing, evaluating, and refining prosecution practices that increase victim safety and offender accountability. AEquitas provides prosecutors with the support, training, mentorship, and resources necessary to objectively evaluate and constantly re-examine and refine their approach to justice. AEquitas staff conduct legal research. We provide 24/7 case consultation, host specialized or state-specific training events and webinars, provide individual experts to jurisdictions and organizations, and we publish articles, monographs, and other resources on topics relevant to the prosecution of violence against women. Polaris is a leader in the global fight to eradicate modern slavery. Named after the North Star that guided slaves to freedom in the U.S., Polaris systematically and systemically disrupts the human trafficking networks that rob human beings of their lives and their freedom. Their comprehensive model puts victims at the center of what they do, helping survivors restore their freedom, preventing more victims, and leveraging data and technology to pursue traffickers wherever they operate. Today's presenters are Jane Anderson, Attorney Advisor here at AEquitas, Bradley Myles, the Executive Director and CEO at Polaris, and Oriene Shin. Jane Anderson is a current Attorney Advisor here at AEquitas, and prior to joining AEquitas, Jane served as an Assistant State Attorney with Florida's 11th Judicial Circuit in Miami-Dade County. She spent her career handling domestic violence, sexual assault, homicide, and human trafficking cases, and as a founding member of the Human Trafficking Unit, and as a prosecutor of many of the state's first trafficking cases, Jane recognized the need to build a coordinated network of allied professionals whose cooperation greatly enhances victim safety and offender accountability. Many of her trafficking cases included related charges ranging from child pornography, sexual assault, money laundering, and racketeering. Additionally, Jane has focused on the use of cyber investigative techniques to identify, preserve, and present digital evidence at trial. Jane is based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. Bradley Myles serves as Executive Director and CEO of Polaris, a global leader in the fight to eradicate human trafficking and to restore freedom to survivors. For over a decade, he devoted himself to combating human trafficking and modern slavery on a local, national, and global scale. Mr. Myles' early efforts focused on directly serving survivors, researching local human trafficking markets, and helping to build DC's first ever human trafficking task force. Under Myles' leadership, Polaris has also worked to strengthen the U.S. national movement against human trafficking through policy advocacy in all 50 states and through a wide range of training and capacity building programs. And Oriene Shin is a strategic initiative specialist at Polaris, where she works with key stakeholders across the country to address types of human trafficking and protecting trafficking victims in their communities. She also reviews and analyzes policies, regulations, and state and local level laws and regulations to better identify and recommend promising practices to stakeholders. So the full biographies for Jane, Bradley, and Oriene will be emailed to you following the webinar, along with a PDF of today's presentation slides. I now would like to turn the floor over to Jane for the substantive portion of today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you all for being online this afternoon on this presentation. Today's presentation has a couple of objectives, and like Emily said, this is part one of a three-part series. And during this part, we really want to make sure everyone understands the difference between an illicit massage business, or as we're going to be referring to it throughout the presentation as an IMB, and the legitimate venues that are providing legitimate services of massage and other body work. We also want to make sure we really look at the harm that is caused by these IMBs and look a little bit beyond the surface of what we might otherwise have suspected. And then towards the end of the presentation today, we're really going to start in on that idea of how are we going to do a better job of investigating the criminal activity that's happening within these IMBs and sort of start thinking about things as new and strategic ways. So we're going to start off with Brad and Oriene doing the first part of this presentation, and I'll be talking to you a little bit later.
All right, greetings everybody. This is Brad Myles. I'm here with my colleague Ori, and we are very, very pleased to be doing this webinar in partnership with Jane and AEquitas. And what you'll see is Ori and I are going to be dividing up these different slides, and we're going to be powering through lots of different content. We appreciate everyone's attention. I think it's a really important topic to be focusing some attention on and appreciate an hour of your time. So you'll hear some slides being covered by me and some slides being covered by Ori and some slides being covered by Jane. So for these next two slides, we just want to give folks an overall basic foundational understanding of what we're talking about here. And this slide just describes what are we referring to as an illicit massage business. Sometimes you hear these things called different ways. I think one of the typical terms that's used by customers of the commercial sex trade is massage parlors. There's different terms. We believe that illicit massage business is a good term. One, because it's focusing on the illicit behavior that's happening there. But what these places really try to do is, instead of being an underground brothel in a home, or instead of trying to operate a cash-based sex business out of a hotel room, these places actually try to open a legitimate business that looks as if it's legitimate. So it'll have a legitimate business registration, and they try to create this cover of plausible deniability that, sure, it can't possibly be a brothel, it looks like a legitimate business. But actually, once they create that veil of legitimacy, behind the scenes, there's different types of illegal, illicit behaviors that are happening. So we think that the word massage here in this title is a little bit deceptive, because sometimes these businesses use lots of different terms. They might call themselves spas, they might call themselves reflexology, they might even say bodywork or foot massage, and so massage is used broadly. But there's just this general concept of what we believe one of these businesses is. Then, moving on, we want to give folks a sense of prevalence. And this is a bit of a moving target. There's not a specific science of estimating how many of these places that there are, because it's a moving target. New places are getting shut down every day. New places are getting opened every day. And the way we learn about these places are mostly through the reviews of sex buyers. And these are guys who call themselves hobbyists, who go buy sex at these illicit massage parlors, and then when they get home that evening, they hop on a website and they blog about it, kind of like a Yelp-style website. So they'll say, just went to Happy Spa at 123 Main Street. I was able to get sex from a woman named Mimi, and here's what happened. So if you look at those, what are called John boards, there's a few of them. There's Rub Maps, there's Spa Hunters, there's other places. Different places give different estimates, and so that's why we've given this range of 6,000, 9,000. The key to know there is sometimes they put legitimate places on these rub maps and other places, almost like a form of revenge porn, where they're trying to kind of damage the reputation of a legitimate place. So that's why we don't want to give a specific estimate, but the main takeaway point here is it's in the thousands. This is a huge national network. If you look at the colors on this screen here, you can see it's in all across the country. It's not just concentrated in 1 or 2 states. It's in all 50 states, and different states have different concentrations of these places based on the color of the state. But you can imagine Texas, California, Florida, New York, major places there. So get your head around the fact that we're talking about at least 6,000 of these businesses all across the country, 6,000 brothels essentially. So this next slide, we just want to give you all a sense of a couple top-line things to understand about these places. One, these places are often heavily networked. So don't think of them as 6,000 individual businesses. Think of them as clusters and franchises. So maybe one owner owns 7 of them. One owner owns up to 30 of them. So we think of these places much more like organized crime, not La Cosa Nostra, formal, hierarchical, organized crime, but more loose-knit, informal, but still organized crime. The other thing to understand, too, is sometimes these places are called, quote, Asian massage parlors, or AMPs, and we want to sort of dispel that myth a little bit. Sometimes we see locations in Oklahoma that have all Caucasian women. Sometimes we heard about a place in Tucson the other day that had all Latino women. So I think it's false to say 100% of these places are all Asian massage parlors, but I think it's safe to say that the majority of these places are exploiting women from China, Korea, Thailand, different countries in East Asia. So while there are certain trends, it's not absolute. The other thing to note, too, is that these places are not just engaging in what might be prostitution crimes. There's often money laundering involved. There's often tax evasion involved. There's often other types of crime involved. And in the worst cases, there's human trafficking involved, where there's actually forced fraud or coercion and the women are being threatened. And there's been plenty of real human trafficking cases with human trafficking charges built out of these places. So that's our concern as Polaris. We're an anti-trafficking organization. We're worried about that. If you move on to the next slide, basically what you'll see here is we want to make sure to be careful to not damage the reputation of legitimate massage places. And there are legitimate Asian bodywork locations where you could do acupressure and acupuncture and all those places. I've been to them for different sports injuries. And so we're not trying to paint with a broad brush and say any place that's a spa with Asian employees is definitely an illicit massage business. We're trying to differentiate that a little bit, and we want to make sure to be careful about that. And one of the ways to differentiate that, it's not a perfect science, but these are 5 different indicators that we wanted to put out there for you all of how to distinguish an illicit place from a legitimate place. 1, the illicit places tend to only serve male customers. So if a female tries to walk in, they just won't buzz her in, or they'll make up some excuse about why they're full for the day. And so if you see a location that only has male clients going in, probably an indication that it's more of a brothel than a legitimate place. Another one, open unusual or late hours. A lot of these places are open until 10 p.m., sometimes 2 a.m., sometimes 24 hours. And you begin to ask yourself the question, why does any legitimate person need to go get a massage at that hour, right? Sometimes you see exceptions, security measures, boarded up windows, bars over windows, cameras outside the front door, ways of concealing what they're doing, putting up trash bags over their windows. So I'd read through these different things and just get a sense of these are some indicators that might differentiate what are the 7,000 locations from the overall locations. These places are trying to advertise to a customer base of men who want to buy sex. So they're trying to advertise for where these men might go. And here's a list of different places where we think these places advertise. Sometimes you'll see it in a billboard like this one. There's a sample page of what Rub Maps looks like. These places are sometimes in newspapers. They're sometimes in classified ads. A lot of them are on Backpage and Craigslist. Sometimes there's even lawn signs in certain neighborhoods where you drive by and there's a lawn sign that's been created. And what they're really trying to do is reach out to this male customer base to say, come buy sex at our brothel and pay $100. So they're trying to advertise to that customer base. And then this is the world of how these places also advertise, but then also the John boards, and that's kind of a term that we use. On Craigslist, Craigslist has a therapeutic services section. You click on that section, the majority of the ads in that section are actually for illicit massage businesses. Some are for legit folks, but I think you could tell that the majority are illicit. Same thing on this body rub section of Backpage.com. And then here's two examples of these John boards. One's called eroticmp.com, one's called rubmaps.com. You could get an account with one of these places, and you'll see you can review where all these men have bought sex, which is basically a huge online footprint, which is a great intelligence source to figure out what can be done there. I'll hand it over to Ori.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oriene Shin, and I'm going to be going over a little bit more and going into the IMB organizations and the networks that they function within. And so when we're talking about an illicit massage business or an IMB, they actually do go through the motions of setting up a legitimate business. And what I mean that is that they find a physical location, they sign a business lease, they create LLCs, they create shell businesses, they obtain capital. They do all of these actions to create this guise of legitimacy. And they also work to obtain proper licensure and insurance, as well as payment methods like credit card accounts and merchant accounts, as well as security measures. And one of the last things that they do is advertise for buyers to come to their IMBs, to the IMB, and then they also recruit the women as well as associates. So one example that we want to show and kind of hammer in the fact that single IMBs are usually not isolated IMBs or businesses. A lot of times they are networked. And an example that we've been able to map out with our data analysis team is Tampa, Florida. On a John board site, we found that there were 33 reviews for 33 separate businesses, 4 closed, 29. On the face of it, they all look like they're isolated mom-and-pop individual shops. But with our data analysis team and a lot of work and a lot of analysis, we've been able to find that these places are in fact networked, and they're very well networked. And as you can see in the top box where there's about 6 major networks, that is Tampa, Florida. And what is very interesting to see is that there are connections that go to other networks outside of Tampa, Florida. So we're not talking about an individual business brick and mortar storefront problem, but we're talking about these major networks that are working in collaboration and together, essentially. And it's not just owner of a property, the manager of the owner, and the women. These networks are also comprised of multiple network operatives. So the buyers would be one part of the network, but there are also smugglers or recruiters who actually are focused on bringing the women over to this area, into the United States. There are other associates, the managers, the business owners or the landowners, and then there's also loan sharks, because we also know the different types of methods they use to control the women to stay within these businesses. Of course, you will see individuals taking on multiple roles, but oftentimes you will see more often than not, you will see more than one individual you'll see multiple individuals taking multiple of these network operative roles. Getting the women to the U.S. is something that we've been looking into, and as you can see, as we have said before, the majority of the women that we're seeing in these IMBs are from the Asian Pacific Islander group. And from there, we also know that there are many different ways that they're bringing the women over, whether it's through a proper temporary visa, either student or tourist or a work visa or fake visa, or they're entering without inspection. Now, when they're coming over with a proper visa, they often do overstay and lose status, which does work against the women and kind of perpetuate this isolation and perpetuate this fear of deportation. We're also finding through our analysis, our data analysis team, that there are major hubs in the United States where the majority of the women are getting funneled through. Either it's JFK in New York or Newark, or LAX in Los Angeles, or SFO in San Francisco. These national hubs are where a lot of the women first come to, and then from there they get sent out into various states and cities across the nation. Managers and mamasans are also another network operative who are the older women, and they're the ones taking care of the women. They're the ones controlling the women's schedules. They're the ones controlling who the women see or when they see them, when they eat, what they do with their free time, if they have any free time, when they sleep. Oftentimes they've been in the sex trade for years themselves. They tend to be older. They live with the woman either at the IMB location or at another location. They're also very aware of the different laws and criminal laws that they might come into contact with, and are very aware and create protocols to get around these. Now, when we talk about illicit massage businesses, we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about sex trafficking in these networks with API groups, Asian Pacific Islanders. Underneath the surface, we also know that there are escort services, residential brothels, room salons, hostess clubs, and karaoke bars, which also work to traffic women and where women are engaging in commercial sex acts. Massage businesses, which pushes them above the surface, is their brick and mortar locations, as well as their high prevalence on the internet. Excuse me. And so from there, we're able to, as we were saying, through the John Review boards and Backpage, we're able to understand a little bit better how the IMB networks operate. And so this is just an overview of how IMBs are set up, and from here, Brad will go into a little bit more of the victim demographics.
So hopefully, I know we're going fast, and there's going to be 3 of these webinars, but hopefully you all are getting a sense of this big picture of how big this network is, how many places there are, how the places operate, all the different network operatives that are there. I think the Tampa initiative is quite powerful to show that these places are more well-networked. And now we want to get a little bit more down into the actual women's experience of who are these women and what is a day in their life, and how should we think about these women who live and work and exist inside these IMBs. So we wanted to start with these victim demographics. So this gives you a sense. This isn't necessarily drawn to scale, and we don't have perfect information. But let's say there's 2 or 3 women inside each location, right? So we're thinking about these 7,000 locations, roughly, and we're thinking about 2 or 3 women inside each location. So this could be as many as 14,000 women across the country. It could be as many as 21,000 women across the country. There aren't precise numbers because these women live indoors, so it's hard to count, right? But these are some of the different populations that you might encounter who have been in an IMB. So one are these older women from Asian Pacific Islander countries. Might be a bit older, might be in their 40s. They may have been historically trafficked when they first got into the country. And this one statistic, 64% are over the age of 40. That's from one sample set of a New York service provider. So you might encounter these older women from Thailand, China, Korea, Philippines. But then certain places, they prize younger women. They want to offer younger women to their customer base. So it might be younger women from those same countries, and then who came into the country the way that Ori just described from all the different methods. You might see some other nationalities, like we mentioned earlier. Sometimes they're Mexican women, Eastern European women, and then sometimes you might encounter women who are domestic U.S. citizens who might be Caucasian or African American. We think that this is roughly drawn to scale to show you that you're going to encounter more API women than the other nationalities, but like I said earlier, we don't want to paint with too broad a brush. So this is who the women are and where they're from. Now here's the key thing to understand about trafficking and about IMBs. This is no different. The people who end up in IMBs already have a form of vulnerability. We're not talking about people who have tons of protective factors in their lives. We're talking about people who have been trafficked in the past, people who have huge amounts of debt, people who have a history of abuse, And Polaris has worked with dozens of women who've come from IMBs, and partner organizations have worked with hundreds of women who've come from IMBs. And time again, we hear the story of just got out of an abusive relationship, or my father molested me as a child, or I had a huge debt because a family member had a medical bill and I felt like I needed to get rich quickly. So the networks are very skilled at preying upon somebody who's already vulnerable and then taking advantage of that vulnerability. So women with, a lot of women don't even have a high school education that they've completed. One partner had some data on that. So people who have lots of friends, lots of family looking out for them, lots of social support networks, very little trauma, good income, probably are not ending up in IMBs. It's the women who've already been through a lot in their lives that this is adding insult to injury. So I wanted to give you that sense of beginning to kind of get an empathy for what the women have gone through. On top of that, then how are they recruited? And we're doing some work on this. This is something that not very much is known. We kind of have spotty anecdotal information on this, but we hear examples of women getting recruited with newspaper ads. Sometimes there's online chat rooms in Korea and China where the loan sharks and labor brokers are kind of dwelling in those chat rooms looking to find a vulnerable woman. Word of mouth. Sometimes you hear about this, come make $30,000 in a month. And how is that even possible? Your salary is hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. And the women kind of get snookered into this in a way that I don't think that the recruiters are being completely honest about this is what you're getting yourself into. Here's a really thorough job description. It's not a legit recruitment process. It's a kind of under-the-table, smoke and mirrors recruitment process, and the women kind of fall for a trick. So that's a bit about the recruitment. Then we really think, and this is what I started to allude to there, there's fraud in the recruitment process. So if you look at any legit recruitment process where there's a thorough job description and thorough interviewing and very much upfront information about what you're getting into, any recruitment process that's above board is a legitimate recruitment process. This is nothing like that. The women have no idea what they're getting into in terms of the conditions that they're going to face. We've encountered women who really thought that they were just going to be doing massage all day, and it was news to them that they had to take off all their clothes and have sex with customers. We encountered women who had some vague understanding that sex might be required, but they had no idea that they would only be paid in tips and that they wouldn't receive any hourly wage. No idea that there'd be all these fees, that when they got there, the manager says, oh, we forgot to tell you that we charge you a fee every day for your toilet paper. And we charge you a fee every day that you want to take a sick day. And the woman's like, wait, what? No one told me about that. So we believe that even on the front end, there's actually some fraud that happens. And when you look at the definition of trafficking that includes force, fraud, or coercion, these are subtle elements of fraud that already begin to happen in the recruitment process. So the women really go through something that's not very above board. These are just a few photos of the IMBs to kind of give you a sample. One, there's a circled picture of a security camera, so they could be screening every guy that comes in and buzzes the front door to make sure that it's not law enforcement. The next one, look at how opaque that is. It's huge cement cinder blocks. You can't see in that business whatsoever. It looks like a prison, actually. And doesn't really look like a legit massage envy where you can peer in the window and see massage happening. So that one just kind of gives you this ominous feeling. That's a picture in San Francisco. And then here's what an individual massage room might look like where the commercial sex act happens. It's kind of a wooden bed there with some sheets and some blankets and a towel, some furniture that they bought at some kind of low-budget store, and then a huge mirror on the window so that the guy can kind of look at himself in the mirror. And then what will happen is there'll be 5 or 6 of those little rooms designed just like that inside a location. And then it'll have the plausible deniability of it looks like there's massage happening, but then it turns into a full-service kind of sex situation. Lastly, we just want to kind of give some empathy to what the women are going through. And these are very, very conservative estimates. I think most women are expected to be on shift for 12 hours a day. And the sex acts in these places, the guys pay for an hour of sex when they pay for a house fee or whatnot. So the women on a max day will probably have 12 different customers. And so we decided to just do some estimates on, let's say the women had a 33% customer base, and they only have 4 customers a day. That leads to a certain number in a month, a certain number in the year. You're talking about thousands of people that these women have to go through. And the last point that I'll share briefly is one thing that we've seen that's so unique about this network is their complete avoidance of minors. Domestic pimps willing to victimize a minor. Latino pimping organizations certainly willing to victimize a minor. But in this commercial sex network and these 7,000 locations, I'd be willing to bet that you'll almost never find a minor under the age of 18 in any of those 7,000 locations because the places don't want to risk it. So they will make sure that the person is age 18 or above, probably 21 or above. So just by going through these slides on the victim piece, hopefully you get a sense that we're talking about vulnerable folks that got defrauded on the recruitment process, that was not above board. They got into the situation and all this stuff surprised them that the network did not tell them up front, and then they had to endure one of these situations and be with thousands of people a year. And you got some images of what those IMBs generally look like. Back over to Ori.
So I'm going to go through a little bit more in depth of the methods of control that traffickers would use in these illicit massage businesses. There are 4 main ways, and as you can tell, physical abuse is not one of the four methods of control. In fact, a lot of times what you will see is there's a lot of psychological and implicit and verbal and mind games, psychological-based games that traffickers will use to control them rather than creating bruises or cuts or cigarette burns on the women, because they also know that those are also, like the minors, those would be easier, that would garner unwanted attention from the police or law enforcement and other people. So the first method of control that we're going to go over is psychological manipulation. This is one of the key ways that they use to not just keep the women in the IMBs, but to keep them scared and break down their sense of self. And so there are many ways that they do it. One is through feigned kindness. So they create an environment, the managers, they create an environment where they make it so that the women only have one person to rely on, and it's them. They're the only ones that are showing them any kind of compassion. But at the same time, they're using the carrot, but they're also using a very heavy stick. They're also telling the women, this is just the way things are. There's no changing the kind of business that we're in, and this is something that you signed on to. Free will, they always tell the women, or they frequently will tell the women, you came here because you chose to be here. You responded to our ads. And also, they will also talk about fear of law enforcement. You will be arrested and deported, so don't go outside because they know what we do here. People know what we do here, and you will be arrested. And finally, they will frequently dangle a carrot where they're saying, yes, you won't be paid now, but once you pay off your debt, you'll be earning $30,000 a month or $20,000 a month or whatever the promised amount was. And so all of these psychological manipulation tactics are creating this environment or this mindset for the women where they just have nowhere else to go, no one else to trust, and it keeps them within the IMBs for longer. The next tactic that I'm going to be speaking to is financial control. This is the idea of debt bondage. A lot of times when they are recruited, the recruiters will say, don't worry about your flight or your visa or your housing when you get here. We'll take care of all of that. And then they'll say it will cost you about $10,000 to $15,000 or even more or sometimes less. But we have heard a wide range, but it's always in the thousands, and these women just have no idea how much the actual cost of a visa and a plane ticket is versus the inflated cost that a recruiter is giving them. And so in addition to the high recruitment costs and advanced pay and debt, they could also be incurring high levels of debt up to 400%. We've seen something as low as 5%, no interest, but we have also heard of and seen interest rates as high as 400%. And the idea of paying off the debt is also a mirage. These women will continuously, through various methods, continue to accrue debt. A lot of times they will accrue debt from housing. So they will have to pay $100 a week or $400 a month or whatever the price that they set is for a room that they share with 3 other women or however many other women. They will also be charged for food, or they will be charged for supplies. Oh, you want a towel, you're going to have to pay for that towel. Or, oh, you need a bar of soap, well, you're going to have to pay for that. Payment is also not normalized. So we actually don't entirely know what the payment system is, but from what we know anecdotally, a lot of their main source of income is through the tips that are given to customers, that are given by customers, and a lot of times these tips are not regular, and they're also told don't always expect a tip. And also, as we have said, through the same kindness of psychological manipulation, the managers will also offer to manage the women's finances and handle the debt and say, don't worry about the bank account. We'll take care of it all for you. And so without any money, without any knowledge of who else to go to, as you can slowly envision, a woman in this kind of situation really doesn't know who to turn to, but also with what means they could use to get out of these situations. Next, control movement. A lot of times, this is probably one of the more physical types of control, where the movements of the women are often controlled by the managers and by the networks. We have heard networks where one woman will actually rotate through different cities across states at 3 to 6 week intervals. So they'll only spend a few weeks to a month or so in one area before they're moved to the next IMB. What this creates is a lack of sense of placement, home, and just familiarity. These women don't know where they are half the time, or they don't know who's around them. Which also creates this environment where they can only rely on the women within the IMB and the networks. Oftentimes we also see taxi systems, and oftentimes they're told you can't leave until a new woman comes to start their shift, and then you can be released into your next. Oftentimes they work long hours and they live on site. The picture you see on the slide is an actual picture that Polaris took when we went along with law enforcement one year, and that is a room in an IMB where the women were staying. As you can see, it's very bare bones, not even mattress with a bed. It is a pillow on the floor with blankets. And this room was probably used by 2 to 3 women at a time. Isolation is the 4th tactic that many of these managers, network operatives will use. Isolation will push the physical manipulation more. It is also a result of a lot of the controlled movement that happens. And what happens is that they have very little freedom to move outside of the business, or if they do, they're very closely monitored. They have limited external relationships. Oftentimes their relationships are limited to the buyers that they meet, to the network operatives, the people who transport them from IMB to IMB, and as well as the other women. They have limited access to media, so they don't really understand what is going on in the world, but they also don't understand the protections that they have. So this kind of isolation further isolates them. They don't know that there is oftentimes an NHRC hotline where they can call in and ask for help. They don't speak they don't speak English or the language here, and so it may also create a sense of fear for them, as well as what the IMBs will do is manipulate the woman's view of the outside world, outside of the IMB, saying, be careful, immigration is looking for you. If you go out that door, they're going to catch you and you're going to be deported back to the country. And so a culmination of all of these 4 factors and what happens to the woman's mindset results in a woman being scared of leaving the IMB. As well as they see no other choice but to continue to perform the sexual acts. Okay. It's key also to understand and remember that oftentimes self-identification is not going to be the first thing you hear from these victims, but it's also key to hear that that not self-identifying as a trafficked woman does not mean the woman has been trafficked. These women have been systematically broken down to accept the way that this is the way their life is going to be for the rest of their life here. And this is something that we want to just stress, that self-identification doesn't mean that they have not, a lack of self-identification does not mean that they have not been trafficked. That self-identification oftentimes will come with the healing process of adequate support from service providers, et cetera. And now Brad, I believe, is going to talk a little bit more about, oh, sorry, Jane. Jane will be talking more into the investigations as well as challenges to the investigations moving forward.
Thank you, guys. Hopefully at this point we have sort of laid out how these organizations are in fact networks of criminal activity, and that the women involved, and we do use women in this case, and I think that just like these organizations are pretty careful about not using minors, we really do see a greater percentage of women-only victims in this particular model. That is not to say that we should not be open-minded about male victims and victims being from the LGBTQ community, because we are learning every day how those how trafficking is occurring in both of those communities. So how do we, now we know that harm, now we know the networked criminal behavior, how do we go about doing a better job investigating these cases? So the traditional investigation, and I'll have to credit Polaris for this, is sort of what we've termed the whack-a-mole approach. So any of you that have ever been to a carnival or something like that and tried to play the game where the moles just keep coming up, you'll understand how this is just a perfect analogy for how unsuccessful some traditional approaches to these investigations are. And this would be described as sort of, hey, a complaint comes in, law enforcement's made aware either through general public, sometimes through legitimate businesses that are like, hey, these guys are giving us a bad name, or perhaps neighboring businesses within the same sort of commercial lot that is recognizing that something illicit is going on. Law enforcement will conduct usually just very limited investigation, maybe a little bit of surveillance, maybe they'll stop a couple of customers leaving the business and threaten them. But then very quickly, undercover officers are sent inside. They wait for a woman to solicit some sort of sexual act in exchange for money, arrest the woman, and hope, fingers crossed, that some sort of investigation is built out of that. Obviously, I don't think I'm hiding the fact that this is probably not the best effective way to investigate these cases. So let's really look back and try to think, what are our goals? And I'd say that in simple terms, I think our goals are probably, hey, we want to make sure we're arresting the bad guys, right? The owners, the operators, the ones that are, through force, fraud, and coercion, forcing these women into the situation. We also want to close down the establishment, and not only this one establishment, but hopefully a network of establishments, and that they just stop popping up down the road. And then, sort of in the simplistic terms, we want to rescue victims, women that have been victimized, perhaps even compounded trauma throughout their lives and that are working in these establishments. We want them to receive services, right? So let's look at our traditional approach and how we are effectively or not effectively achieving these goals of investigations. So arresting the bad guys. Well, we're really doing a bad job about that, right? Because who are we arresting under this traditional approach? We're really arresting the people that we have come into this identifying and presuming that these are victims, and then they're the first person we're arresting. So not so great. Also, these are misdemeanor arrests that, often don't even, let's say we really do want to go after some sort of misdemeanor criminal activity that's going on in here. We're not getting anything out of these cases. There are no arrests for the real offenders. there's nothing for us to sort of hang on to build a larger investigation. So we really don't even have any hope to get to the owners and operators through this. And we've really just perpetuated the harm that these women are experiencing through arresting them and involving them in a criminal justice system. And really, we're not even looking at demand, right? We're actually using some of these, the perpetrators of the demand, we're actually using them to build cases against potential victims that are the women working inside the illicit massage business. So Brad, I think, is going to address the next failure.
Yeah, these next two, I mean, we've seen this for 10 years. I mean, the traditional approach that Jane just laid out of trying to send in an undercover and try to get the woman to solicit them, it really just fails on all three of these levels. And I appreciate what Jane just shared about it fails to really get the real offenders, but it also fails to close the IMB. So when you go in and you get an undercover arrest on that one woman, you probably don't get an undercover arrest on the other two women that are there, and you may or may not, but most likely not, have some sort of evidence to arrest the manager, because the manager is careful not to touch the money. The manager is careful not to procure the sex act. The manager just kind of silently escorts the guy into the room. So most likely the place might close down for a few hours, maybe even a day, but once they've kind of adjusted from that one woman getting arrested, they open back up, either later that day or the next day. So you've really done nothing to actually impede the business other than just remove one employee for a couple days, right? So it doesn't really close the IMB. If it does close that place and that one kind of crop of manager and women rotate out, the actual physical structure is still there. The address is still there. All the furniture is still there. The advertising is still there. The habit of the sex buyers know to go to that location, that's still there. They just move in a new group of people. So you haven't actually eliminated the business at all. You've just swapped people out. And then it really does increase the harm to the victim. So I do think that if one of the three goals is to really shut down these 7,000 illicit businesses, the traditional approach doesn't do it. And then this last piece I think is incredibly important. I mean, I hope you all get the sense that these women have been through a lot in terms of the lies they've experienced, the manipulation they've experienced, all the forms of exploitation and subtle control that they've experienced, and the volume of sex that they've had to have, not even to mention that some of those customers engage in sexual assault and engage in other things. So I do believe that these women should be thought of as victims and not as offenders or criminals. So if you begin to think of the women as victims, even if they're not self-identifying as a victim, in this instance, the victims are getting jailed, they're getting arrested, they may get additional fees added to their debt of, look what you did, you went and got caught, and now we had to pay for a defense attorney for you. And then very rarely are the local law enforcement who are doing these arrests aware of local service providers to refer to the women. And so the woman gets arrested, she might go to jail for the day, she might get a charge on her record, and then she'll get scooped back up into the network. And it's not a very benevolent or caring or trauma-informed response to those women, and it really makes the women the target instead of the owners, all those other members of the network, or the buyers, who we believe should be the real target. So the traditional approach really just fails on all three levels.
So that's it, the failure on all three levels, Brad. So what do we do to do better? How are we going to develop new strategies? Number one, let's look at what the biggest challenge from a law enforcement perspective, what are they going to say to us? And of course, I come from sort of the prosecution stance, so that's, keep this in mind. But what I hear are sort of two different things. One is, we give these women an opportunity to tell us what's happening. We want them to tell us what's happening, but they're just not talking to law enforcement. We're not getting any information from the women, and therefore we hit a wall and we can't go any further. And the other complaint that we have, or the identified challenge, is we can't connect the business owners, even the managers, we can't connect them to what's going on in these private rooms. There's this built-in defense. Hey, she's on her own. Whatever she's doing in that room, I'm not responsible for if she's doing a little extra something, right? This is something I think we're all going to hear as being sort of, oh, yeah, we recognize these challenges that have been expressed to us. So a couple of things to look at right away. We need to be working with the women in the IMBs. We need to be doing a better job. I think it goes without saying, one of the ways we could probably do a better job if we're looking to, can we get these women to a place where they're able to participate, where they're able to tell us what really has been going on with them? Well, number one, probably let's not arrest them. That might go without saying, but I think it's important. Let's not do that. If we're having these investigations and we're going into the IMBs as part of some sort of takedown, let's make sure we're thinking ahead of time to have service providers available on site, making sure those service providers are culturally sensitive, that there is appropriate language access, and that these providers of services have distinct information about IMBs and about the trauma that goes on with the women associated and working in IMBs. We need to be planning ahead. We can't just pull them out of this IMB where they may be living and working, or at least their living and working situations is controlled by the same people that are controlling the IMB. We need to be planning ahead for shelter, food, clothing, these emergency needs, not even to mention sort of the long-term needs of these victims. And then many times we're going to be wanting to make sure we're prepared to address immigration concerns. U or T visas are often appropriate in working with these women. So number one, let's work with these women instead of arresting them. We need to also be thinking, let's build an evidence-based case. Let's think ahead of time, how could I go forward with this case without a victim testifying? If I never had any of these women participating in the criminal process, if they're never able to do that for whatever reason, how can I still move forward, right? And there's a couple of tips here, but I really will say we're going to go into a lot more depth about this in part 2. But words of solicitation, they're non-hearsay. Those words of solicitation can be admitted into court without a victim testimony. Forfeiture by wrongdoing is a proposition that the state can introduce evidence and statements of victims if we can also establish that the victim is unavailable due to the wrongdoing of an offender. So think about that. If our offenders are controlling these women through the whole process of them working in the IMB, it would be, it makes sense that they're continuing to control them after an IMB has been investigated, and the same tactics could be used to dissuade a victim from participating in the prosecution. If we can prove that that's happening, maybe we can get in some other statements. And then also let's think about other charges. Hey, we may not be able to establish human trafficking at the end of the day, but we probably could establish something else. And we're going to look at some of those other charges that we can be looking at, including money laundering, tax evasion, racketeering, things like that. So the other thing is the other challenge, connecting the criminal activity inside of that one little massage room with the owner of the network. This is the other big challenge, right? So we talked about how we could maybe do a better job with working with the women. Now this is really comes down to, hey, it's our job as prosecutors, as law enforcement, it's our job to prove state of mind. This is not unique to any criminal investigation. We're often having to prove, hey, this guy broke into the house with the intent to steal something. How do we prove what's in somebody's mind? We always have to use circumstantial evidence in all of our cases of knowledge and intent. How can we do that? Let's look at how these businesses are being advertised. The fact that it's only a cash business, the fact that it's open until midnight, that they only accept male clientele, that they have illegitimate licenses, that they offer services such as like bed showers or shower beds. All of that, maybe not one piece of it will prove intent, but all of that together is a very strong position to take of, hey, this owner, this manager working in this business, being responsible for this business, he knows exactly what's going on in that room. And there's some case law that legitimizes this argument. And as always, AEquitas and Polaris are available to you for follow-up on specific things in your jurisdiction. And then the other thing is, let's follow the money. Let's do a better job of making sure we're tracking exactly how this money is flowing in and out of the business. And again, part 2 is going to really hone in on some specifics on these. So when we're talking about overcoming challenges and changing approaches, really we want to be looking at, hey, let's look beyond a single prostitution offense in this one particular instance. Let's look at more permanent solutions, or how are we going to shut down the actual network that is supporting this one particular business. One of the ways to do that is interagency efforts. We'll be talking about all the different partners in your communities that you could be working with to pool resources, to share experiences, and to sort of complement each other's administrative and investigative powers. Also, let's really look at this as from an organized crime angle, looking at financial crimes, racketeering crimes, organized crimes. And again, a lot of those are going to be they're not going to be dependent on victim testimony, which of course will strengthen your case ultimately when it comes to trial and presenting to a jury. But also, we do want to make sure we're thinking about those victims, and we remain victim-oriented. That means not arresting the women and providing comprehensive services to them. Going forward, we want to make sure that we are taking a victim-centric approach, always remembering that at the heart of these cases and why we ultimately want to do this work is because there are thousands of women that are being controlled by networks of offenders who are harming them in infinite number of ways, that are controlling them and that are really sentencing them to this life of slavery and repeated trauma. And there are some really distinctive harms that come with the IMB model as opposed to some of the other human trafficking models that you may be familiar with and the PIMP model. There are some really distinctive harms that are happening, and we need to make sure that we're responding by providing specific care to these women. We also want to make sure we're leveraging our existing partnerships to improve the investigations and prosecutions, and all of us should be willing to move forward from this and saying, hey, we're willing to invest in a long-term approach to really be talking about like, hey, we don't want to play whack-a-mole anymore. We want to permanently dismantle these networks. So we have a couple of upcoming webinars that these, I believe, are tentative dates, but it looks like they're probably going to be these dates, so mark your calendars. The next part 2, is going to delve into some really specific investigative strategies. We'll talk about collecting evidence, trauma-informed interviewing of the victims in the case, and the partnerships from which you should be looking in your communities, both on an investigative piece and of the service providers. And then the third part of our webinar series will be actually, let's talk about trying these cases, making the charging decisions, what kind of pretrial motion should we be looking at, how do we educate the jury and the judge really about the trauma that's occurring in IMBs and how they can better view the evidence through that lens. And then recreating the reality of the trauma for the juries. And then we'll talk about how that may work with also civil and administrative proceedings that could be happening concurrently. So thank you all for listening. This is my information, and I'm sure it's going to be provided to you in a million different other ways. But if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
And this is our, Jane, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you. We're at time here. This is Ori's and my contact information. I'd really encourage you to reach out to Ori because she works on this initiative full time. I work on this initiative maybe 10, 20% time, but I love it and believe it's really important work. So feel free to reach out to both of us, but Ori, really, this is her full-time job. And really what I'd say, I mean, to wrap up, we're incredibly proud to be partnering with AEquitas on this. We're very, very excited about the next two webinars. We hope everybody, we really designed this as a series, so if you're on this one, we hope that you sign up for the next two because it's really 3 parts of learning. And for us, these places have been existing in the U.S. for 30 or 40 years. I don't think there's really been a meaningful, thoughtful, or coordinated deterrent effect for decades. I think it's been decades of whack-a-mole and popcorn approaches that have been largely pointless. I think that we have a real opportunity here as a country to transform the way that these cases are approached in the ways that you just heard. I think of the 7,000 businesses, I think it's a safe bet to think that there's at least 1,000 criminal networks across the country that are running these businesses. Polaris has mapped out at least 300 of those of the 1,000 networks, and that's really the name of the game, is advancing how these cases are done, bring it in a more victim-sensitive way and trauma-informed way, transform lives, and actually get rid of this organized crime, and show that we could demonstrably deter a national criminal network that's gone untouched for so many years with a much more thoughtful approach. And we really see prosecutors as the key audience that can make that happen. Of course, there's more. I think there's police departments that will play a role. I think the feds will play a role. I think state licensing boards can play a role. Even landlords of shopping centers can play a role because these places rent their businesses. So if landlords step up and get smarter, but the most important audience we really see is prosecutors, which is why we're so thrilled to be speaking to all of you today. And we'll talk to you on the next one. And thank you so much to AEquitas for all the partnership on preparing this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brad and Ori and Jane. We want to thank all of you for coming online. And we do want to see you again in May. Those dates are pretty good, but we don't have the registration link yet, so keep an eye out for your emails, and we will have that content on our websites as well. So I will, like I said earlier, be sending out the handout of the PowerPoint slides that you saw today on today's webinar, and we will be recording. We'll have the recording available as well, so you can share this with colleagues. So on behalf of AEquitas, Polaris, we thank you for your participation, and remember that you will be able to see our contact information. Just give us a call. AEquitas is 24/7, and we're happy to engage with you more on this important topic. Have a good day.